So those of you who have worked with me for many years know that, I have all of these lovely books, probably six of them now. Actually, I'm on to my sixth book that have really been filled with my own visions during meditations, transmissions that I receive, every piece of information that I deem important, whether it's a communication with a dragonfly that I'm just sitting watching and I get a whole message from the dragonfly, or from the baobab tree I met first when I turned 50, which is almost 10 years ago now, because I turned 60 next year. When I met her, I really felt like she was my mother and climbed her branches. And my then partner, who's now my husband, was going to check us in and came back and was like, "Where is she?" And I was sitting at the top in the arms of the baobab, crying my eyes out, having this deep conversation with her. Um, and I think, for most of my life, I've had that deep connection in nature. I was born in the UK and then moved here when I was 7. But even as I was flying over the African continent, I have this very vivid memory of looking out the window in the aeroplane at the bulge of Africa and being so excited to be in this land, right? And so I've been in this land now for 50 odd years. And the journey has taken me from living in a very kind of natureless place in the gold mines in Gauteng, to moving down to Cape Town when I started university. And of course, in my science degree in archaeology and environmental science, it took me out into nature again. But I've been wandering the mountains since age 11. My parents didn't do that kind of thing. And I was a swimmer, so I swam 7 days a week. And one of the families at the swimming pool, and you'll understand why I'm rambling on about this because it fits into the story. But one of the families in the swimming pool did hiking trails. And so up in the Transvaal, Gauteng, in the Limpopo Mountains and the Soutpansberg, you've got incredible hiking trails that would take you 3, 4 days. And so from 11, I would borrow someone's secondhand rucksack and I'd go get my mom to take me to the shops and I'd buy tins of probably not very healthy food, but I didn't have all the fancy camping equipment. So I'd take my tin with my tin opener. In those days, they had little cheese things that you'd squeeze out between two little, what we call in South Africa, little provitas, right? Do you remember those cheese thingies? So I'd have the cheese thingies and I'd have my little biscuits and I'd had the tin that when everyone's cooking their meal, I'd literally just take the paper off the tin and open it and I'd shove it into the fire and literally scoop it out. So I've always been kind of had a very powerful but simple connection with nature. For me, it's not about all the stuff we take with us. It's always been about sitting and contemplating nature. And even as a child, I would just sit on the corner of the street and I'd watch the little ants and beetles kind of just doing their own thing. Um, so I've always found peace there, even though I've had a very analytical, curious mind. I think from very early on, I was always communicating with life. That's kind of what I want to call it. Um, and we could go into so many stories, and I could fill you with all the stories I have in my books. Oh, good. Yes, Alice and a like-minded nature spirit. Um, and I could say that I've come from the future. There are times I feel I've come from the future to stop the Armageddon. And, what we see is not real humanity. We actually have this beautiful galactic heritage, cosmic heritage, that is what I've been calling the new human. Um, but essentially, the mother principle that I teach is around the aliveness of being human. So that a tree in its natural form, the acorn has the innate wisdom to turn into an oak tree. The flower knows when to blossom, it follows the seasons and the cycles. Every living thing understands the cycles, is completely open and connected to life, and lives in that state, except the human. Um, and we could go into various reasons about why that has happened. But during the past 3 years, I would say, and especially when it comes to my program material and how I've consolidated my teachings, everything that humans have been told who they are including the mind, emotions, the egoic state, all of the psychological three-letter acronyms that describe our mental states, which now, there's a diagnostic something manual. I have many clients who are psychologists and psychotherapists, and we have this discussion always about how that manual has literally like quadrupled in size over the last few years. And it's not that, well, we could say humans have become more mentally ill, but for me, it's not that. For me, it's a complete, and no disrespect to any psychologist or psychiatrist, right? I have them as clients, but it's in the framework of the mind, is that the human has been completely conditioned to believe and to feel that that aspect of ourselves controls everything. And in my work, in that aspect of the mind, there is no room for what I term the soul. And the soul is just another word that humans have conjured up, right? But for me, if I was really to state what that is, I would call it like your crystal star. There is a light within you that is your absolute center of, I want to say divine, but also divine and spirituality are all words that have been hijacked too, right? But we can say that deep within you, because it's in the multi-dimensional layer of the heart. So as a multi-dimensional being, you are vast, not only in your radiance, in your expanse, but in your depth, in your depth. And it's not just about sitting with the heart and putting your hand on and breathing. Absolutely, you can do that. But when I feel into people, that I'm going deep into their very center, and I'm accessing what I call the crystal star. And that crystal star is the cosmic seed that accesses the earth plane when the baby is born. My belief, my knowledge, and especially with my own children, that soul, if you like, or that star that travels many lifetimes, that holds your unique vibration, drops in or connects in with the mother and the baby around 16 weeks. But the actual allocation of that in the depths of the multidimensional field in the physical body only happens as that baby is born. So we can say that as the baby is born, that seed, that crystal star, moves into the physical body and sits there like this deep treasure waiting to be found. And then you come into an energetic, very complex environment that is completely false in that it has been created by the minds of men and the actions and behaviors of humans that have mostly been following an anti-life agenda. So this false reality that has become aligned to what being a human is not a true reality. And where we are now, we're really on the cusp of beginning to build, because it comes from each one of us. It's not going to come from out there. It's going to come from within us, a new form of humanity. That's why I put my Substack posts out on like, what does it mean to be human? Because to share a little bit of a personal journey, in my own life, as someone who sees and someone who feels quite intensely, up until probably a few weeks ago, I would say, because the last 2 months for me have brought incredible life challenges and learnings. I was always seeking to find the tribe. And of course, all of you are part of that tribe, but in my intimate relationships, someone who can accept me for what I can see and feel. Because most of humanity doesn't really engage in a way that I can feel things, right? And all of you are empaths, so all of you are sensitive. But I think before I could even speak, I had a knowing that the soul, this crystal star, this light, is our true essence. And that when I was in nature, I could be in that place because I was just another aspect of nature. So I could sit and I could commune with the little beetles running along a tar road because the beetle themselves may be a reduced form of the consciousness, but not to belittle it in any way, but it was still connected to what I call the breath of God, right? Because we know that in the field of quantum mechanics and quantum science is that there are new stars and galaxies being born all the time. There's a continual evolution of life, and there's a continual movement of life. So every aspect of life is, if you like, a fractal of a fractal of a fractal that comes from the same source, whatever names you want to give that source, God, creator. But what humans have done, and maybe we can go into a whole lot of conspiracy theories because it's not just humans, there is an anti-life agenda at play, is that this life force that is so incredibly miraculous that it can create physical form from spirit, because that's what's happening, right? We are materialized from energy, not the other way around. So our physical body is created from the multidimensional field of the heart. So this planet that holds the the seed, if you like, the ability to create form from spirit, is actually one of the highest evolved planets in the galactic universe, right? And you may think, well, why? What are you on about? But in our truest form, think about it. You only have to stand in nature to look at the beautiful forms that have been created, right? To know that the seed is this tiny, tiny material thing. But when it has the right nourishment and the right light, it grows. I mean, the baobab, the one I was sitting in, was probably 1,300 years old. So this ability to create form from energy, to create form from spirit, is a highly sought after ability, which is why it's been hijacked, which is why we're targeted. But in our most truest form, in a form that is multidimensional by nature, we are connected to that life force and we radiate that life force. And as humans, and obviously I'm sharing my beliefs, right? You don't have to take them. You can drop everything and make your own. I'm sharing from my point of view, is that our only role is to respect life and to be a guardian of life. And what has happened over the course of thousands of years is that greed and power, and these days, money is more important than a human life. Let's just let that sink in, shall we? Money has become more important than a human life. Never mind what we're doing to the planet and all its animals and plants, right? So in the teachings that I've received, and all of my teachings are received through my channel. Yes, I have lots of books and I've picked up things along the way, but what I teach, I need to embody. So it's been transmitted to me over many years now, is that the mind, if we look at the lower mind, and of course our brain is fabulous, right? But it is still a lump of gray matter that governs our biological state. But the heart field, the energetic heart field, is that field that holds the wisdom. So when I talk about the mind and the ego, which for me is all of those identities or layers you may have had to pick up during the course of your lifetime, because our current society does not support the soul or the innate authentic expression of self. So people put up barriers, they wear masks, they maybe develop an overprotective nature. And so the layers of the ego are called cloaks because they're basically covering something. are developed as a result of your experiences as a young child, as someone in school, as a person in your constellation, your family constellation, and all the other ways in which we are restricted. And every human that is currently on the planet in in their energetic field has a foundation of fear because the current construct we're in runs on making sure everyone is scared. And the fear may be subtle, but everyone is driven by a need to put a roof on their heads and food in their stomach. Now, in a natural system, that wouldn't be present. So, the construct, the energetic construct that is the false construct, is the ego mind fear. And for me, I call that a closed system. Not completely closed, but for someone who is very disconnected, doesn't believe in a soul, doesn't believe in whatever, and has their head down, scurrying about on their hamster wheel, and no disrespect to anyone doing that, but I'm using it as an example, making ends meet and da da da, staying in this place, they are in a closed system. And in a closed system, there's no room for transformation. So, this open system of the heart, of being connected to the life force. And for those that have listened to me before, I've spoken about the soul, that energy, as being a feminine principle because it is creative by nature and because it holds potential. But when the feminine is allowed to drop in, which is the soul, which is spirit, then when it's integrated, how the your body, how you act, what you create in form is the masculine expression of that feminine aspect. So when we talk about the divine feminine has been lost, it's not about bringing back the sacred rose priestess and dancing around in circles wearing white robes, or just due respect to those that do it. It might help, but the feminine principle is soul. And we are in a soulless world where the soul of humanity is lost and fragmented. So, going back to some of the key moments that I was offered as to why we can still hold hope, right? Because that's the most important thing, because that's exactly where we need to be right now. Is that, and it's by no means everything, but I'm just going to bring out a few key points. And Alice, you've probably heard this before, so excuse me if I'm repeating something. But from around I moved into this journey as a healer when I was called in 2014. 2011 had been a major turning point for me because I left my first marriage after 20 years and it just blew my heart wide open. But I found a voice that I'd suppressed for probably most of my life. So it was a massive awakening of my authenticity, but also an awakening to actually why I'm here in the first place. Because that's something I wrote. A lot of people say, like, my soul's purpose. What is my soul purpose? And a soul purpose is not a career path or something done, right? The actual purpose of a person is woven into your soul. So your purpose is to connect more and more into that soul aspect and to find ways of where you might be restricting it. So from that time, 2014, and when I chose to walk away from my corporate job, and was wandering the forest saying, okay, now I'm here, like, what do you want me to do with this? And then my guides, who have a great, and I don't like the word guides anyway, the people I speak to in the unseen realms, they laughed and they said, well, you've been removing bugs and designing programs for 24 years in IT. Now we're just bringing you to the human system. And so pretty much since then, I have been learning about the multidimensional energetic operating system of the human. And one thing I can say with what I'm going to share now with you is that it's all symbolic and metaphoric. But what it points to is that fundamentally, with the cosmic wheel turning and the constellations turning, we have shifted into a new operating system in a good way. And I'll talk more about that. And so, in order to take advantage of the operating system that is incoming, especially over the next 5 years, you are asked to change your software system into what I'm calling soulware, which is what are my internal systems that I'm still running? Am I still running loopy, loopy thoughts? Am I still holding anxiety? Am I still standing on fear? Because those are the old ways, and those are the ways that need to be released. So in March of 2023, when there was a whole lot of things that came before that. And before the pandemic, I kind of saw this plane crashing. And literally, I saw, this image of the oxygen mask coming down. And I was like, oh, everyone's going to need more self-care. They're going to need. So that was my beginning of 2020 video that I put out, because I started only putting videos out around 2018 or so. And then, of course, we're all walking around masks. But for me, looking back now, that image of the airplane crashing and the oxygen mask coming out and around self-care, self-accountability, self-responsibility was the beginning of the change. And so for a lot of people, 2020 brought in that sense of, wait, it gave people an opportunity to just stand back a little bit. Let me just stand back and look at my life. Oh my God, I feel alone. I feel anxious. I feel, what job am I really doing? And it wasn't true for everybody, but it was that moment in time where we were all like a gravitational field. We were all pulled together as one humanity with a single common problem, whatever we thought of the pandemic. And for me, it was like a black hole. I don't know, those of you who know science, a black hole is where everything gets pulled in. And the black hole continues as long as it still has capacity to suck everything in. And at the moment where it doesn't have capacity anymore, it opens and expands and it starts to create. And so, with all due respect to the loss of lives that happened in 2020, and I wrote a lot about black holes before that, I really feel it was that turning point, that like. And so for the last 5 years, from 2020 to 2025, those that had some kind of wake up have been given an opportunity to work with themselves, because the work is only ever within. So when I said the crystal star is deep within you, I'm really saying it's deep within you, and you need to go search to find that inner treasure. But now we're in a different space. So in March of 2023, when there was a big Pluto Aquarius, because my work very much aligns with the stars, I always find it interesting that I'm feeling something, and invariably there's a big alignment, right? So the big Pluto Aquarius, New Age, Aquarius New Age, all the astrologers and everyone else was talking about it, was around March, and I needed to go out into the mountains. And I went out into the mountains, and there was a major electrical storm. And we had a little rooftop tent on our car. And the car was like going like this. And my husband was like, whoa, because he hadn't done a lot of camping. And I'm like, we'll be fine, don't worry. But I'm just being called to stand in that field. And he was like, I beg your pardon. The lightning's coming, the thunder's crashing around the rocks. I said, I need to go and stand in the field, because that's how I live my life, right? If I feel an inkling, whether it's for a cup of tea or to stand in the middle of a field in a lightning storm, I will do it, because that's just who I am. So I stand in the middle of this field, like wet feet, got a bit of a raincoat on, but the sound was just incredible, and the lightning was just all over the place. But in my spiritual side, let's call it that, I was called to look up into the heavens. And as I looked up, it was like this dome was just opening, like a huge dome, like just opening. And the words that dropped in were, the simulation is over, the true light is returning. And that was March in 2023. And we know what happened in October 2023, right? And as probably all of you were, like, I was heartbroken. But during the same time, I had been called, and I didn't know it was going to correlate, but of course it did, with a spiritual sabbatical to France, where I had connected with a Kabbalah teacher. That's a whole story for another day. But the sacred letters started speaking to me, and were just moving through me, and I needed to follow. And so in France, I was taken to Montsegur, which I don't know whether any of you know the story of the Cathars, but the Cathars basically burnt themselves alive because they did not succumb to the pleas of the Catholic Church to change their faith. because they believed that every person had a right to Christhood. Every person was able to be connected to God. And of course, the Catholics did not agree with that. So the concept of this true light turned into the mother, I just call her the mother, into a very strong but beautifully expansive feminine essence that started communicating with me and basically telling me that she'd returned. And for me, just we can make any number of assumptions, but if we just really state it simply, is that the mythology of the Garden of Eden template, where there were Adam and Eve, and they had this opportunity to be in this beautiful garden, and it was stopped for some reason. That indicates the fall from grace, if you'd like to call it, because that flow from the mother is grace. And during the time of the Gaza war, and I was receiving all these transmissions, of course, I was in, I mean, I flew over the Mediterranean at 3 o'clock in the morning, and this light caught my eye, and I turned right, and there was the Venus, the star of love, shining in the sky. And I just heard the word Star of Bethlehem. And I was just like, whoa, would you look at that? But then just to the left, I saw all the missiles in Gaza firing up into the skies and dropping. It was this most bizarre experience. And I couldn't stop looking at it. And then on the left, there were these stars that started dancing with one another. And no, I hadn't been drinking and I didn't take a sleeping tablet. It was just a very strong physical experience of the planet of love, the war in the middle, and then on the left-hand side, these moving stars, this movement, right? And so um, when I was contemplating what I was seeing, and mentally I was imagining what was happening to those people. While I was in awe of these two things, my human self was just dragged to this point, and I wanted to send my spiritual side there to see. And what I was told was, don't go there. It's too dark. It will suck you in. And I got a very strong experience of this sinkhole, the depravity of humanity that's been churned up and actually removed to make way for something else. But there is the loss of human life and the tragedies of the war in between. But the one message she left me was, everyone is deserving of my grace. And of course, I'm kind of thinking this one and that one. It was everyone, which for me can be interpreted that everyone is able to transform themselves into what the real human is, which is a loving, kind, compassionate, living being who is a guardian of all life. So, fast forward to where we are now with the Neptune and Saturn conjunction, because I felt for a long time that February was going to be a big thing, never mind the Iran war. But we are now in a place where the heavens have moved so that two major planets, one representing mysticism and spirit and all things dreamy, has moved together with Saturn, which is all about form, into the sign of fire, which is Aries. And for me, the heart, as you'll know, Alice, you've been around here long enough, is a fiery place. It is your sacred center. It's like a white blue flame. You could call it plasma. It's a different energy. It's a different element, should I say. Resides deep within us. And it is that now that is being really asked to come to the fore and to move through you in a transformative way, but in a way that there is still a responsibility and accountability for what you are choosing to do with your energy, which is really about thoughts, words, actions. But we are being incredibly supported by the change in operating system, which is why I chose the words for this particular talk to the natural order of all things, because the collective energy of humanity is in an unnatural state. an unbalanced state. And you know, I was reading something the other day too about creation, and someone was speaking about that the archetype, the collective archetype, the metaphysical archetype of creation also involves destruction. It involves darkness as well as light. So it has to be accepted that when we're moving towards creation, things are going to be shaken up a bit, right? And so that in the midst of this, our own demons, for want of a better word, our own underworlds, our own anxieties are also shaken up, but shaken up in a way that we shouldn't attach to them and allow our mind to sink into hopelessness and fear, but to come back deeply within and remind yourself of the aliveness that you have within you. To remind yourself of the aliveness that runs through your blood, where your cells are continuously doing things you're not aware of, when your heart is beating all day long and you don't think about it. You don't worry about whether your heart's going, well, some might, but you don't have to think about, oh, my heart needs to beat now. It's in the natural order of things. You don't have to worry that your food's going to be digested. You know, obviously there are people that are ill, but that your blood cells are going to do their own thing and make red blood cells or white blood cells when they feel a foreign invader. Our body is within the natural order of things if we are holding a field, which is why I had a student last weekend who said to me, so do you really believe that if someone was soulfully embodied, there would be no illness? And I said, yes. Does my human mind struggle with it? Of course. But in my knowing, I know that if we are in our soul, connected to life, connected to the mother, everything is in balance. It is in homeostasis. And when a system is in homeostasis, there is no illness or disease. So, sorry, I must take a breath. I get so passionate about the stuff. Sorry, I'll just ramble on. I haven't even given you opportunity to ask questions. So now, as much as I sit and cry my eyes out at some of the things are happening because I'm not a uncompassionate person, there is also a deep, deep part of me that has hope. And I have my own times of hopelessness. But for the first time in my whole life, I kind of feel like I know who I am. I know what I can see and feel. In the thousands of remote healings I've done, I have seen things that are most incredible, miraculous, beautiful things. And now at this point in the collective, I'm asked to apply what I see to an inner center that says, but I know things are falling apart, but there's a new to be created. And it doesn't matter whether I see one person a week or 100,000 a week. All we're asked to do is to align with what is true for you and what work you're being asked to do and leave the rest up to God. Because we have to find some way of connecting in a higher wisdom that has our back. And I believe that that higher wisdom, the operating system, has shifted, irrespective of what you're seeing. And we know too that the energetic environment always precedes a physical change or a materialization. I'm 60 next year. Am I even going to live to see any change? I don't know. But if I don't do my work because of that, then my ego is in charge, right? Because my ego wants me to know that I'm going to see a change and that everything I'm doing is going to be for some reason. That's the ego. I don't have to do any more than just show up and show up to those people who find me and trust that everything will begin to find a new natural order. Because just like a piano tuning fork or a resonance, when one starts to resonate, so does the next, and so does the next. So you're asked not to try and bring everyone onto your path or even try to force someone to think like you do. because that has also been the age of spiritual distraction and the spiritual ego that has also tried to tell you that you need to do a this and a that and take this and a that and do this, da, 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 da. And it just gets hell of a confusing out there, right? When all you're asked to do is come into your center and ask yourself, what is it that I need to do to help me find calm, to help me reach that deep place? Because it is like the cosmic waters in our very depths. Whilst the upper echelons and the mind is crazy and, like the southeast is howling today, for those that know Cape Town, the ocean in the southeaster, the ocean is just on the surface. But if you go in and you go deeper and you go deeper and you go down, there is a place there where it is quiet and still. And that's where you're asked to go, because then you will begin to receive the insights and the messages, even if they're very small nudges, that will help you move outside of your closed system and connect into a more expanded, light-filled system. Because the greatest despair I feel in the world today and the loss of hope is kind of out there because of all that's going on, right? Yet the most common form of despair in the people I've seen is not being truly yourself. And so to be truly yourself means to find the courage to say things or do things, or just to sink into a deeper part of yourself and just wait and ask the question, who am I really? Who am I really? Because we are in the great unknown. And with these peelings away of the ego, from one day to the next, you might be a completely different person. In one of my most intense and extremely painful periods of transformation recently, I literally felt like not only had my heart been torn open by a hyena, but that my skin had been ripped off me, because it was such I think the psychologists would call it ego death or whatever. There was such a realization that came to me when I was like, whoa, wait, that's not me. There was enough of a distance created that I could see that pattern, and drop it. That's going to come more and more often, but it's not always comfortable. So when I was tuning into, just to like receive some messages around the equinox, around, where we are now with Saturn and Neptune in Aries. We've now just started Aries. We really are at the birthing point, that creative fire, right? Where fire meets water. And fire meets water is represented by so many symbols across different mysteries. The Ankh for me is the sun on the water, right? Fire on the water. And for me, the fire is the sacred fire of your heart on the deeper waters, the very depth of your inner being. That's when your crystal star can come up and start talking to you. So what I wrote down here in terms of the heart fire was, in these intense times, it is the fire of your own heart that you are asked to keep alive. Do not allow the darkness of the world to steal your light, to steal your hope. Do not allow others to swallow your dream of a better world. Do not allow your mind to give you all the reasons why you don't matter and how you cannot possibly make a difference. If you have any belief, even a small one, in the realms of spirit, then believe this, that the flame of your heart, even if it's only just burning, can shine more brightly than a million candles, and it can bring hope to those who have none. Open up that heart even more and allow your courageous spirit to breathe through you. Yes, and look, it's almost 10 to 5. I've definitely spoken too long. So, in a nutshell, in a nutshell, that is it. And so one might be saying, like, where do I start? And for me, with my students, the first session is always about the ego. And it's mainly about how you can begin to identify any protective layer you might have up. Oh, I behaved like this under these circumstances. Oh, my mom always told me I was good whenever I behaved like this. So do I have patterns that I continue to behave like that even when I'm an adult and it doesn't really matter? Because it does require a certain amount of rebellion, this, right? And it's not all love, light, and blessings. God, sometimes that crew drives me nuts. Sorry, I have my own thoughts about these things, but it does, because it's not about sitting quiet, and it's really finding that passion of your sacred heart. It's not just about sitting there and saying all day long either. This is about going deep within yourself to develop a level of self-awareness that is rebellious in nature, because each one of you are entirely unique. The soul of humanity that is lost, that is our jigsaw puzzle that we're now being asked to put together again. You are only responsible for your piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Because if you can bring in that piece, which is your soul, which is your truth, because the soul is truth. That's it. If you're avoiding your truth, your soul's never going to find you. If you bring in that piece of the jigsaw, then those that maybe have the little light blue corner, oh, wait, there's a corner, I need to be there. I need to be near that light blue light. Then we can start to build this puzzle that is the soul that we need to recover. And of course, there's much more than that, because obviously as a healer, I work with the soul field. And there are so many souls that are trapped right now. Oh my God. The soul lights of so many people are just, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I won't go into all of that. But interestingly, I had a client yesterday who never met. I'd given her remote healing, just one example, more than a year ago. And as part of that, there's sometimes a 30-minute check-in, especially if it's a client I've never worked with before, to talk about the healing. And of course, I didn't remember anything about the healing, so I had to dig out her papers, because she contacted me and she said, "Can we have that check-in now?" Like a year later. I said, "Sure, absolutely." And when I pulled out the healing notes, they were hectic. Like, I had to go into an extremely dark place and work through layers and layers of mud and concrete to eventually, and obviously I'm talking symbolically, right, to find her soul light represented by her body deep underground, with so many others that have been locked away there too. And so I was able, when I say I'm not just talking me, right? I act as a conduit, and I have many beings that help me. We were able to retrieve it, and I was able to place it back. And I got told that her soul light was so powerful that it was dangerous to many. And so she was hijacked and put away. Now, we need to understand we can still act in this closed system of the body, mind, and ego, even though the soul is far away, and the soul might be fragmented, and there might be many pieces over different lifetimes. It can happen like that. There's so many different scenarios. But anyway, while I was preparing for her chat, I was reading this and thinking, whoa, okay, maybe that's why she didn't contact me, right? Because whenever I offer a recording, I just send it with love from my heart and I leave it, because I can't stay with each remote healing wondering how it's going to be received. I just trust it's for the highest good, and I pass it on as best as I can in words. And she started off very emotional and crying. And it was so beautiful because a whole lot had changed in her life. She said, literally, I am not in the same place. Everything has changed. And she told me of nightmares she used to have concurrently before I gave her healing. And she said, I can only describe that the nightmare was where I ended up in this room and all I felt was evil. And in the corner of this room, I'm just sharing this as an analogy for the fact that these things are happening, right? In the corner of the room, she said there was like this grave, and it went deep down, and I couldn't get out of the room, and I was forced to look in, and at the bottom of the grave was a skeleton. Now, if you ask me, she was receiving a representation of where her soul was lying. And she was a Jewish lady, 30-year-old. And she said to me, and she is spiritually connected, but not in the way necessarily maybe that I teach my students, but she said to me, I felt like you brought my presence back. Those were her words. And then she said, can I tell you what my name means in Judaism? And I said, for sure. And she said, my name means light carrier. So there are these beautiful things that are happening with many, many people where these soul fragments, these aspects of light are coming back, are being able to be returned. And when we bring something back into our beingness, we become more powerful. So acknowledging an inner child wound or contemplating something that happened when you were 14 that made you become, much more reserved and not maybe the free spirit you were. Those are all important things to go through because the shutting down, the restriction needs now to be let rid of so that you can stand in your truth and say, I know who I am. I know who I am. So I'm going to finish off before you ask questions, if you have questions, with a prayer or just like a little few little words. Because if we look at, and again, Alice, I've worked with you, but the imaginary realm is the language of the heart. It's the language of the fifth dimension. Everything is created from that realm. Even if you think simply, if you want to build yourself a table, you would already picture the table in your head before it gets created. It's that principle, right? So the imaginary realm works with the heart field, and we know the heart field now is the place we need to be, that sacred fire of creation. So when we work with imagination in our heart field, we literally are dreaming a new world into being. So don't drop the dream you have from your heart because of everything that's happening. Hold that dream in your heart as if it is the last thing you will ever hold on to for your entire life. Because each one of us that can hold on to a dream of a new way is adding to the potential for that new way to find its place in the physical realm. So what I wrote down here is hold on to the dream you hold deep within you and ignite that dream. What did I write here? Sorry. Invite them in. Oh, and ignite that dream in your belief, if you have the belief, I do, if in your belief of the redemption of humanity. May we all hold peace in our hearts and the vision of a world free from suffering for all living things. May it be so, and so it is. And that's what I'd like to finish on. Because, while I'm saying that, I'm getting very emotional because we are extremely exposed to the suffering. But from an energetic standpoint, if you want to be truly spiritual and truly connected, you have to be able to disconnect from the suffering to be able to come here, which is your place of creation, which is your center, and hold on to that dream that you have for something more, because the true human, the new human, is an alive human, is someone connected to life, to the force of their soul and spirit, to their own heart, and to the heart of Mother Earth that holds us all in her space. That, for me, is the real human.